The Spore Collective by Cassandra Winters. I should have known something was wrong when the birds stopped singing. It was a crisp October evening in Monument, Colorado, 1997. My son Jake and I were setting up the telescope in our backyard. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, a perfect night for stargazing. That's when we saw it, a black arrowhead-shaped object crawling across the sky. "Mom, what is that?" Jake's voice quivered with excitement and a hint of fear. I squinted through the telescope. "I'm not sure, honey. Maybe a new type of stealth plane?" But I knew it wasn't. No plane moved that slowly or with such eerie silence. As it passed overhead, a faint shimmer seemed to fall from its underside, like diamond dust catching the moonlight. That night, I dreamed of drowning in a sea of glittering sand. The changes were subtle at first. Mrs. Henderson, our usually chatty neighbor, stopped waving hello. Her eyes seemed vacant. At the grocery store, people moved with an unsettling synchronicity, reaching for items in perfect unison. Jake noticed it too. "Mom, everyone at school is acting weird, like robots or something." I hugged him close, trying to hide my growing unease. "I'm sure it's nothing, sweetie. Maybe just a bad flu going around." But deep down, I knew it was far worse than any flu. 3 days after the sighting, I woke to find Jake's bed empty. Panic clawed at my throat as I ran outside, calling his name. That's when I saw them, our neighbors, dozens of them, walking in perfect formation down the street. Their movements were fluid, almost graceful, but utterly devoid of individual personality. And there, in the middle of the group, was Jake. "Jake!" I screamed, running towards him. He turned, but his eyes, God, his eyes, they were glassy, unfocused, like a doll's. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "Mother, you must join us. We are one now. We are complete." I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. This wasn't my son. This was something else. As I watched in horror, more people emerged from their homes, all moving with that same eerie synchronicity. Their voices rose in a monotone chant, "Join us. Become one. Resist no longer." I ran. I locked myself in the house, frantically trying to call for help. But the phones were dead, and the TV showed nothing but static. Through the windows, I could see more and more people joining the group outside. Their chanting grew louder, more insistent. Night fell, and with it came the return of the black arrowhead. It hovered silently over the town, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. As I watched, tendrils of light stretched from the craft to the people below. They stood motionless, arms outstretched as if in worship. I could feel something pressing against my mind. A presence, vast and alien, trying to seep into my thoughts. I gritted my teeth, focusing on memories of Jake, his first steps, his laugh, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about space, anything to keep my sense of self intact. The pressure intensified, my nose began to bleed and my vision blurred. But still, I resisted. Dawn broke, and with it came a moment of terrible clarity. I realized the awful truth. The spores weren't just controlling people's minds, they were rewriting their very DNA, turning them into something not human. I had to get out, had to warn someone. But as I crept towards my car, a hand grabbed my arm. I spun around to see Jake, his skin now pallid and slightly translucent. Beneath the surface, I could see something moving, pulsing. "Please, Mom," he said, his voice a chorus of others. "Don't fight it. It's beautiful. We're all connected now. No more loneliness, no more fear." Tears streamed down my face. "Jake, please, this isn't you. Fight it." For a moment, I saw a flicker of my son in those glassy eyes. But it was quickly subsumed by the collective will. His grip tightened, inhumanly strong. I did the only thing I could. I ran. The car sputtered to life as the townspeople, no, the things that used to be townspeople, converged on me. Their movements were faster now, more predatory. In the rearview mirror, I saw Jake leading the charge, his face a mask of alien determination. As I sped out of town, the black arrowhead rose into view. It seemed to watch me, a malevolent eye tracking my escape. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just happening in Monument. This was bigger, much bigger. I've been driving for days now, avoiding major roads and population centers. Every town I pass through, I see the signs. People moving in unison, that glassy look in their eyes, the silence where bird songs should be. If you're reading this, it might already be too late, but you have to try. Resist the voice in your head telling you to submit. Remember who you are, what makes you unique. It's the only way to fight them. And if you see a black arrowhead in the sky, run, run, and don't look back, because they're coming, and they want us all. Smoke and Mirrors by Cassandra Reeves. The heat was unbearable, even through my fire-resistant gear. Sweat stung my eyes as I gripped the hose, directing a stream of water at the relentless inferno consuming the Utah scrubland. The roar of the flames drowned out everything but the pounding of my heart. I'd been fighting wildfires for 5 years, but something about this one felt different, wrong. Maybe it was the location, Dugway Proving Grounds, a military installation shrouded in secrecy. Or maybe it was the way the fire moved, almost as if it had a mind of its own. "Jenkins, watch your left flank." Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through my radio. I pivoted, barely avoiding a collapsing juniper. That's when I saw them. 3 black helicopters, unmarked and eerily silent, gliding low over the burning landscape. No pilot in their right mind would fly in these conditions. Unless... A chill ran down my spine. Despite the infernal heat, I'd heard rumors about Dugway, whispers of secret experiments, of things that went bump in the night, but I'd always dismissed them as conspiracy theories. Now, I wasn't so sure. The helicopters formed a triangle formation, hovering over a patch of land that seemed oddly untouched by the flames. As I watched, transfixed, the ground beneath them began to shift. At first I thought it was a mirage, a trick of the heat and smoke, but then I saw it clearly, a seam opening in the earth, revealing a yawning darkness below. "Captain!" I screamed into my radio. "You seeing this?" Static was my only answer. The fire around me seemed to dim, as if all light was being sucked into that impossible hole in the ground. And then, rising from the depths, came the smoke. But this wasn't the thick, choking smoke of the wildfire. This was something else entirely. Thin, silvery columns that shot skyward with unnatural speed and precision. As the smoke cleared, I saw them. Crafts. Not aircraft of any design I recognized. They were sleek, almost organic in shape, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal. They rose from the ground in perfect synchronization with the helicopters, forming a larger triangle in the sky. My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a hallucination, brought on by heat exhaustion and smoke inhalation. But deep down I knew. This was real. And it was terrifying. A hand gripped my shoulder, spinning me around. I found myself face to face with a man in a crisp military uniform, untouched by ash or sweat. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice cold and emotionless. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, choked with fear and disbelief. "What you've seen is classified," he continued. "National security, you understand." But I didn't understand. None of this made sense. How long had the military known about them? How long had they been hiding this from us? The man's grip tightened painfully. "You're gonna come with me now. We need to debrief you." Panic surged through me. I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that if I went with this man, I would disappear. Another conspiracy theory, another whispered rumor. I did the only thing I could. I ran. The wildfire raged around me as I stumbled through the underbrush. I could hear shouts behind me, the thrum of helicopter blades. But louder than all of that was a new sound. A high-pitched whine that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. One of the crafts was pursuing me, gliding effortlessly through the air. Its surface rippled and shifted, forming what looked like an eye that was fixed directly on me. My foot caught on a root, sending me sprawling. As I hit the ground, the world around me seemed to flicker. For a brief moment, I saw through the illusion. The fire wasn't real. None of it was. It was a cover, a smokescreen to hide what was really happening here. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. How far did this go? How much of what we thought we knew was a lie? The whine grew louder, filling my head until I could barely think. I felt a presence behind me, alien and terrifying. As I turned to face it, time seemed to slow. I saw the craft, hovering mere feet away. I saw the military man, his face a mask of cold determination, and beyond them both I saw the truth. Our world wasn't ours anymore. Maybe it never had been. A beam of light shot from the craft, enveloping me. I felt my body go rigid, my consciousness slipping away. My last thought, before the darkness took me, was a prayer. Not for myself, but for humanity. Because if what I'd seen was real, if our own government was complicit in this invasion, then God help us all. About the author, Cassandra Reeves was a wildland firefighter and freelance journalist. She disappeared in 2005 while investigating unusual fire patterns in Utah. This manuscript was found in a safety deposit box, with instructions for it to be published in the event of her death or disappearance. The Spine Collectors, by Dr. Ingrid Schaefer. The taste of copper flooded my mouth as I stared at the X-ray, my hands trembling. There, nestled between my vertebrae, was an object no human doctor had put there. Small, angular, unmistakably artificial. "Mein Gott," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the dim light of my study. It had all started 6 months ago, on a crisp autumn night in our quiet corner of northern Germany. My wife, Anna, and I were settling in for the evening when a strange glow caught my eye through the window. At first, I thought it was car headlights, but as I approached the glass, my blood ran cold. A disc, easily the size of our house, hovered silently over our back garden. It pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. I called for Anna, my voice cracking with fear. "Was ist das?" she gasped, pressing close to me. Before I could answer, a beam of light shot from the craft, enveloping us both. I tried to move, to shield Anna, but my body wouldn't respond. We stood, frozen, as the metallic taste flooded our mouths and a pressure built in our skulls. I don't know how long we were like that. Seconds? Hours? When the light finally receded, we collapsed to the floor, gasping and retching. The disc was gone, leaving only the quiet night and our racing hearts. We told no one. Who would believe us? But things changed after that night. Anna complained of headaches, of hearing strange buzzing sounds no one else could hear. I found myself waking at exactly 3:17 every morning, drenched in sweat from nightmares I couldn't remember. And always, that damned metallic taste lingering on our tongues. I convinced myself it was stress, the aftermath of our shared delusion. Until tonight, the X-ray had been Anna's idea. Her back pain had become unbearable, and she insisted something was wrong. I humored her, certain the doctors would find nothing. How wrong I was. Now staring at the undeniable evidence of something in our bodies, panic clawed at my throat. I rushed to wake Anna, to show her what I'd found. But she wasn't in our bed. Heart pounding, I searched the house, calling her name. That's when I saw it through the kitchen window. The disc, back again, hovering silently over our garden. And there was Anna, walking towards it with slow, robotic steps. 9! I screamed, rushing outside. But as I reached for her, that familiar paralysis took hold. I could only watch, helpless, as a beam of light engulfed her. The pressure in my head built to an excruciating level. Images flashed before my eyes, sterile metal rooms, spindly gray figures with enormous black eyes, gleaming instruments probing and cutting. With a Herculean effort, I fought against the paralysis. My muscles screamed in protest as I inched forward, closer to Anna, closer to the light. Just as my fingers brushed her arm, the beam vanished. The disc shot upward with impossible speed, leaving only the stars above us. Anna collapsed into my arms, unconscious but breathing. As I cradled her, I felt something shift beneath her skin. The implant, moving of its own accord. Over the next weeks, I became obsessed. I rigged up monitoring equipment, scanning for any unusual signals, and every night, like clockwork, the disc would return, hovering just at the edge of detection. I tried to remove the implants, but they seemed to meld with our tissue, causing agonizing pain at any attempt to extract them. Whatever these things were, they were part of us now. Anna withdrew into herself, spending hours staring blankly at walls. Sometimes I'd catch her murmuring in a language I didn't recognize, her eyes glazed and unfocused. I knew I had to do something. To stop them, whatever they were, from taking her, taking us, again. That's why I'm writing this now. As a warning, a desperate plea to anyone who might listen. They're out there, these collectors of flesh and bone. They take more than just your body, they take your very self. I've rigged the house with explosives, crude but effective. The next time that disc appears, I'll detonate them. It may not stop whatever grand plan these beings have, but at least Anna and I will be free. If you're reading this, be vigilant. Watch the skies, yes, but also watch yourself. That strange dream, that unexplained pain, that metallic taste on your tongue, it might not be as innocuous as you think. And if you wake one night to find yourself walking unbidden towards a light you don't understand, fight. Fight with everything you have, because once they have you, truly have you, there's no coming back. The disc is here. I can feel the implant stirring, urging me towards the window. Anna is already walking outside, her movements jerky and unnatural. My hand hovers over the detonator. Forgive me, Anna. Forgive me, world. At least we'll be free. About the author, Dr. Ingrid Schaefer was a respected neurologist at the University of Hamburg until her mysterious disappearance in 1994. This manuscript was found among her personal effects, along with numerous X-rays and signal detection equipment. The whereabouts of Dr. Schaefer and her husband remain unknown. The Beeping Within, by Nathaniel Cross. The first time I heard the beeping, I thought it was the car radio. Betty and I were driving along the same stretch of highway where it all happened, where they took us. It was supposed to be therapeutic, a way to reclaim the road, to prove to ourselves that we were still in control of our lives. But as the sound pierced through the static, sharp and rhythmic like a Morse code signal, my hands tightened on the wheel. "Do you hear that?" I asked Betty, my voice trembling. "Hear what?" she replied, her gaze fixed on the trees rushing past us. She'd been distant lately, her mind always somewhere else, somewhere up there. "The beeping," I said, glancing at her. It's coming from the radio." She frowned and turned the dial, but the sound didn't change. It wasn't coming from the speakers, it was coming from inside my head. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, their pale, featureless faces and those enormous black eyes that seemed to see straight into my soul. The beeping followed me into my dreams, growing louder and more insistent until I woke up gasping for air. I told myself it was just trauma, a lingering effect of what they did to us, but deep down, I knew better. The beeping came back 2 days later while I was shaving. It started faintly, like a distant alarm clock, then grew louder until it drowned out everything else. My vision blurred, and suddenly I was there again, on that cold metal table under their blinding lights. They surrounded me, their movements deliberate and mechanical. One of them leaned in close, its face inches from mine. Its mouth didn't move, but I heard its voice in my head. "Prepare." Prepare for what? I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't respond. Their long fingers probed my skull as if searching for something hidden beneath the surface. When I snapped back to reality, I was on the bathroom floor, blood dripping from a gash on my cheek where the razor had slipped. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely clean myself up. I didn't tell Betty about the episodes. She'd been through enough already without me adding to her burden. But as the days passed, the beeping became more frequent and more intrusive. It would come without warning, in the middle of a conversation, while eating dinner, even while lying in bed next to her. Each time it triggered flashes of memory, fragments of their experiments on me. Their voices grew clearer with each episode. The time is near. I started avoiding Betty, afraid she'd notice how erratic I'd become. The truth was, I didn't trust myself anymore. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at her for minutes on end without realizing it, my mind blank except for that infernal beeping. One night, I woke up standing in the middle of the living room with no memory of how I got there. The front door was wide open, cold air seeping into the house. My bare feet were caked with dirt as if I'd been outside. I slammed the door shut and locked it before collapsing onto the couch. What was happening to me? Was this their doing? Had they planted something inside me during our abduction? The thought made my skin crawl. The breaking point came when I heard the beeping while driving alone late at night. It was louder than ever before, each pulse sending a jolt of pain through my skull. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Then everything went black. When I came to, the car was parked on the side of an unfamiliar road deep in the woods. The engine was off, but the keys were still in the ignition. My heart raced as I looked around, trying to piece together what had happened. That's when I saw them. 3 figures stood just beyond the reach of my headlights, tall and thin, with those haunting black eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. They didn't move or make a sound, they just stared at me. The beeping intensified until it felt like my skull would split open. My body moved against my will as if pulled by invisible strings. I stepped out of the car and took a shaky step toward them. "No," I screamed internally, fighting with every ounce of strength I had left. For a moment, it felt like something inside me snapped, a tether being severed. The beeping stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The figures tilted their heads in unison, as if studying me before vanishing into thin air like smoke dissipating in the wind. I don't know how long I sat there in stunned silence before finally mustering enough courage to drive home. When Betty asked where I'd been all night, I lied and said I couldn't sleep, so went for a drive. But she knew something was wrong. She could see it in my eyes, the fear that never quite left me anymore. Now, every time I hear even faint electronic tones, a microwave timer or a distant car alarm, I freeze up inside because part of me knows this isn't over yet. Not by a long shot. They're still out there watching, waiting, and whatever they've done to me, whatever they've implanted inside my mind, it's only just beginning. The Road to Oblivion by Alejandro Vega Solis. The heat shimmered off the asphalt like a mirage, distorting the endless stretch of highway before me. Mexico City was a fading smudge in my rearview mirror, and the barren landscape of the outskirts sprawled in every direction. My old Chevrolet truck rumbled steadily, the familiar vibrations a small comfort in the oppressive solitude of the road. I, Salvador Zurbarán, had driven this route 1,000 times. But today, something felt off. The air seemed too thick, the silence too complete. Even the ranchera music from my crackling radio sounded distant and warped. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the roadside, arm outstretched, thumb raised in the universal signal of a hitchhiker. As I drew closer, a chill ran down my spine despite the sweltering heat. There was something unnervingly familiar about his stance, the angle of his head. I should have kept driving, should have pressed the accelerator and left him in a cloud of dust. But some compulsion, some force beyond my understanding, made me slow down. The man's face came into focus as I pulled over, and my heart nearly stopped. It was him. The being from that night 7 years ago. The night I tried so hard to forget, to convince myself was just a nightmare brought on by too much mezcal. But there was no mistaking those eyes, too large, too dark, seeming to swallow all light. His skin had an odd, waxy sheen that didn't quite look human. And when he smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp, I felt my soul try to shrink away from my body. "Hola, Salvador," he said, his voice carrying an echo that shouldn't have been possible in the open air. "It's been a while." My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream, to floor it, to wake up from this nightmare. But I was frozen, pinned by those obsidian eyes. You're not real," I managed to croak. He chuckled, a sound like grinding metal. "Oh, I'm very real, amigo. As real as the implant we left in your brainstem. As real as the changes we've been making to your DNA, bit by bit, every time we visited you in your sleep." Memories flooded back, the blinding light, the probing instruments, the sensation of my very essence being unraveled and rewoven. I gagged, tasting copper and ozone. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He climbed into the passenger seat with fluid grace that was almost beautiful in its alienness. "To give you a warning, Salvador. And a choice." The truck started moving of its own accord, the steering wheel turning under my limp hands. We accelerated, the landscape blurring around us. "Humanity's time is ending," he continued, his voice taking on a strange multi-toned quality. "The process has already begun. The water, the air, your very food, all of it is preparing you, changing you. Soon you'll be ready for integration." I wanted to deny it, to rage against this impossible future. But deep down, I knew he spoke the truth. I'd seen the signs, the inexplicable illnesses, the subtle shifts in human behavior, the growing sense that something fundamental was off. "But you, Salvador," he said, turning those bottomless eyes on me, "you're special. You were one of the first. You've been changing longer than most. You could have a place of privilege in the new order." The truck was moving impossibly fast now, the world outside a smear of color and light. I felt a pressure building in my head, a buzzing that grew louder with each passing second. "What's the choice?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the rising din. He smiled again, and this time his face seemed to ripple, revealing something monstrous beneath the human facade. "Join us willingly. Embrace the change. Help shepherd your fellow humans into their new existence. Or..." The pressure in my head became unbearable. I saw flashes of a future too horrific to comprehend. Humanity twisted into something unrecognizable, the earth reshaped to suit our new overlords. Or resist, he continued, and watch helplessly as everything you love is consumed. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. How long? I whispered. It's already begun, he replied. The final phase starts tonight. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. The truck was parked on the side of the road, engine idling quietly. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise. I sat there for a long time, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as a hallucination, a product of too many long nights on the road. But I could feel it now, the wrongness inside me, the alien presence that had been growing for years. As darkness fell, I made my decision. I turned the truck around, heading back towards Mexico City. I had to warn them, had to try to save whoever I could, even if it was already too late. In the distance, I saw lights in the sky, too many to be stars, too still to be planes. They were coming, and God help us all, we weren't ready. About the author, Alejandro Vega Solis was a prominent Mexican journalist known for his investigations into unexplained phenomena. He disappeared in 1972 while researching a series of mass UFO sightings outside Mexico City. The Celestial Cage by Dr. Tabitha Casey. The stars were too bright that night, not the soft twinkle of New Hampshire's usual skies, but a harsh, clinical glare, like pins pressed into a black velvet specimen board. Barney's hands tightened on the steering wheel as we wound through Franconia Notch, his knuckles pale under the Milky Way's unnatural glow. "You see it too, don't you?" I whispered. The thing had been following us since Portsmouth, a pulsing light that danced just below the tree line. Not a plane, not a satellite, something that breathed with the forest, its rhythm syncing with the crickets until the woods fell silent. Barney slammed the brakes near Indian Head. The car filled with the acrid stench of burning rubber. Through the windshield, the light solidified into a disc. Smooth, silent, hungry. My skin prickled as a high-pitched whine drilled into my skull, vibrating my molars. "Roll up the windows," Barney shouted, but the handles wouldn't budge. Frost bloomed across the glass, intricate patterns forming symbols that hurt to look at. My husband's scream pulled my attention back to the road. They emerged from the beam, tall gray figures with bulbous heads, their limbs too slender for human proportion. Their eyes, God, their eyes, black and reflective as insect chitin swallowing the moonlight whole. Barney went limp first, slumping against the door as three figures surrounded him. A fourth pressed its three-fingered hand to my forehead. Cold seeped into my bones and the world dissolved. The table was colder than the February lake where Papa taught me to ice fish. Straps bit into my wrists, their texture neither metal nor leather, but something organic, like dried sinew. The creatures leaned over me, their needle-tipped instruments glinting under sourceless light. No mouths, no expressions, just those terrible eyes, unblinking and endless. Focus on the patterns, I told myself as a needle entered my navel. Focus on surviving. The ceiling swirled with constellations I didn't recognize, stars arranged in sharp angles and intersecting lines. A map. They wanted me to see it, to remember. One creature held up a glass vial filled with dark fluid, my blood. It inserted the sample into a machine that hummed like a dying refrigerator. Lights flashed. The beings turned to each other, emitting clicks and buzzes that made my sinuses ache. Suddenly, their fingers were inside my mind, not my body. Pulling. Memories erupted like film reels. Barney proposing at Hampton Beach. My kindergarten students' laughter. Mama's funeral roses. The aliens sifted through them with clinical precision, pausing when they reached my childhood astronomy charts. Zeta Reticuli. The thought wasn't mine. It bloomed behind my eyes, accompanied by a star map so vivid it burned. I screamed until the straps tore my skin, but they didn't stop until the map was seared into my neurons like a brand. We woke parked on Route 3, dawn bleeding through the pines, 2 hours missing. Barney had a ring of raised bumps around his groin, perfect circles that oozed yellow pus. My abdomen bore a scar shaped like a starfish, its ridges glowing faintly under sunlight. The hypnosis sessions came later. Dr. Stevens said it would help with the nightmares. Instead, I sketched the star map during a trance, my hand moving with alien precision. When astronomers confirmed it matched Zeta Reticuli, the Air Force arrived. Polite men in dark suits took my drawings, told me to forget. But the itch started that night, a crawling sensation beneath my right temple. I scratched until blood matted my hair, yet it persisted. By the third week, I could feel them. Not memories, presences, slithering through my synapses, tracing the neural pathways where they'd planted their map. Barney found me in the bathroom at 3 a.m., surgical scissors aimed at my scalp. "They're in here!" I shrieked, thrashing as he pinned me. "The map isn't just a map, it's a beacon." He left when the paranoia worsened, said I needed rest, but I saw how he'd linger at windows, scanning the sky, how he'd jump at the whine of distant airplanes. The symbols came next. I found the first one etched into our mailbox, a jagged rune that matched the frost patterns from that night. Others appeared daily, carved into park benches, scrawled in condensation on my classroom windows, always in my peripheral vision. Always gone when I looked directly. Last Tuesday, the map began moving. I'd pinned my original sketch above the desk. Around midnight, the lines squirmed like earthworms, rearranging into new constellations, coordinates, dates, a countdown. My hand moved without consent, transcribing the changes into a notebook. 44 degrees 51, 71 degrees 23 AW, October 19th, 11:07 p.m., Franconia Notch. Barney didn't answer his phone. The rental car's radio spat static as I sped north, past the same landmarks from that September night. The itch had become a drill, boring toward my optic nerve. Headlights revealed figures in the woods, tall, gray shadows keeping pace with the car. They waited at Indian Head, not the four from before. Dozens now, standing motionless in a semicircle around the disc. Their heads turned in unison as I skidded to a stop. The high-pitched whine returned, worse now, a dentist's drill hitting nerve. "You don't need him anymore," I screamed, clutching the star map notebook to my chest. "Take it back." A cold hand gripped my shoulder. I spun, expecting Barney. Instead, a gray face stared down, its black eyes reflecting my own twisted expression. The creature's thoughts slithered into mine, crisp and glacial. "You misunderstand. The map isn't a guide for us. Its finger tapped my throbbing temple. It's a cage for you." The disc's light swallowed me whole. This time, I didn't fight. As the procedures began, scalpels dancing across my frontal lobe, I finally understood. They weren't tracking me. They were cultivating. The star map spreads now virus-like through every mind I touch. Students, neighbors, the agent who lost my files. It whispers behind their eyes, a subliminal siren song preparing humanity for harvest. They let me go again. Of course they did. Look up tonight. See how the stars twitch, how they form angles no constellation should make. We're all cartographers now. The Hybrid Harvest by Dr. Eliza J. Blackwood. The chainsaw's growl echoed through the Apache Sitgreaves forest, drowning out the whisper of wind through the pines. I wiped sweat from my brow, glancing at my watch. Almost quitting time. The November chill was settling in, and I was ready for a hot meal back at camp. That's when I saw it. A disk of light, hovering silently above the clearing. Not the warm glow of sunset, but something cold and alien. My skin prickled as the air around me seemed to charge with electricity. "Mike Dennis!" I yelled for my crew, but my voice sounded muffled as if I were shouting underwater. The light intensified, searing my retinas. I stumbled backward, tripping over a fallen log. As I hit the ground, a beam shot out from the craft, enveloping me in a cocoon of icy radiance. And then, nothing. I woke to the hum of machinery and the acrid smell of ozone. My eyes struggled to focus in the harsh, clinical light. I was strapped to a table, naked and shivering. Panic clawed at my throat as I tried to move, but my limbs felt leaden. That's when I saw them. They weren't the little green men of cheap science fiction. These beings were tall, willowy creatures with skin like polished pearl. Their eyes were huge, liquid pools of obsidian that reflected my own terrified face back at me. One approached, its movements fluid and unsettling. Long, spindly fingers reached out, hovering inches from my chest. I wanted to scream, to fight, but my body refused to obey. A sharp pain lanced through me as the creature's hand seemed to phase through my skin. I felt it probing, not just my flesh, but deeper, as if it were sifting through the very essence of what made me me. Images flashed through my mind, DNA helixes unraveling, chromosomes realigning. I saw Earth, but not as it was now. Oceans rose, swallowing coastlines. Deserts expanded, devouring fertile land. And through it all, these beings, watching, waiting, planning. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just studying us, they were adapting us. Time lost all meaning. I drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the constant prodding and the sickening sensation of being unmade and reassembled on a cellular level. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. I found myself back in the forest, disoriented and nauseous. 5 days had passed, though it felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. My crew, my family, they'd all thought I was dead. I tried to tell them what happened, but the words felt hollow, inadequate to describe the horror I'd experienced. And as the days turned to weeks and weeks to months, I began to doubt myself. Maybe it had been a hallucination, a trauma-induced fantasy. But then the changes started. It was subtle at first. My eyesight seemed sharper, colors more vivid. I could hear conversations from across the room with unsettling clarity. Food tasted different, not bad, just alien. I ignored it, desperate to believe everything was normal. But I couldn't ignore the dreams. Every night, I found myself back on that table, surrounded by those pearl-skinned beings. But now, I understood their chittering language. They spoke of Earth's future, of the coming changes that would make our world uninhabitable for humans as we knew them. But not for you, they'd say, their black eyes boring into mine. You are the bridge, the first of many. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. But the terror didn't end with consciousness, because now, awake, I could feel the truth of their words in my very bones. My skin had taken on a faint, pearlescent sheen in certain lights. Scratches healed unnaturally fast. And sometimes, when I wasn't paying attention, I'd catch my reflection in a mirror. And for a split second, those obsidian eyes would stare back at me. I tried to warn people, to tell them what was coming. But who would believe the ramblings of a man who claimed he'd been abducted by aliens? I was dismissed as a crackpot, attention seeker. But I know the truth, and I know I'm not alone. There are others out there, changed like me. I can sense them now, a faint buzz at the edge of my consciousness. We're scattered, hidden among the population, silent seeds waiting to sprout when the world burns. And it will burn. The dreams show me that much. Floods, fires, plagues, Earth becoming a crucible that will forge a new kind of humanity. I write this now as a warning, though I doubt anyone will heed it. The changes are already in motion, set in place long before that night in the forest. We're being prepared, cultivated for a future none of us are ready for. Look around you. Look closely at your friends, your family, your neighbors. Do you really know what's lurking beneath their skin? Can you be sure they're still entirely human? Because I'm not. Not anymore. And with each passing day, I feel myself slipping further away from what I once was. The forest light took more than just 5 days from me. It took my humanity, replacing it with something other. And the most terrifying part? A growing part of me is glad for it. Because when the world changes, we'll be ready. We'll survive. Will you? About the author, Dr. Eliza J. Blackwood is a xenobiologist and former consultant for SETI. She vanished in 2019 while investigating genetic anomalies in rural Arizona. This manuscript was found among her personal effects. The Harvest Below, by Emmett J. Calloway. The Kansas night was as vast as it was dark, a sea of blackness punctuated only by the pinpricks of starlight above. I stood in my cornfield, telescope aimed at the heavens, seeking solace in the cosmic dance I'd watched since childhood. The warm August air carried the scent of earth and growing things, a familiar comfort in these troubled times. I'd been having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams of lights in the sky and missing time. But out here under the stars, I could almost convince myself that all was right with the world. Almost. A flash caught my eye. A satellite, I thought at first, tracking steadily across the sky, but then it did something no satellite should. It stopped, dead still, hanging there like a frozen spark. My heart began to race. I adjusted the telescope, hands trembling as I focused on the object. It was no satellite. The thing was disc-shaped, its surface rippling like liquid metal under the starlight. Suddenly, it shot off at an impossible speed, vanishing in the blink of an eye. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? The corn rustled behind me. I spun around, half expecting to see gray figures with almond eyes emerging from the stalks. But there was nothing, just the wind and the endless rows of corn. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The image of that impossible object burned into my retinas every time I closed my eyes. On the third day, I saw the formations. At first I thought it was vandals. Some of the corn in the north field had been flattened, creating strange geometric patterns. But as I got closer, my blood ran cold. The precision was inhuman. Each stalk was bent at exactly the same angle, not broken but impossibly curved. And there, in the center of the largest circle, was a series of marks pressed into the earth. Numbers. Coordinates. My hands shook as I input them into my truck's GPS. The location was only about 50 miles away, deep in a patch of woodland I'd driven past 100 times but never explored. I knew I should call the police, the FBI, someone, but who would believe me? And something deep in my gut told me this wasn't meant for them. It was meant for me. The drive was a blur. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. What would I find? What if they were waiting for me? The GPS led me to an abandoned-looking shack in a clearing. As I approached, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There was something wrong about this place. The air felt charged, unnatural. Inside, I found a trapdoor hidden under a moldy rug. It opened with a groan, revealing a steel ladder descending into darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. Not now. I had to know. The tunnel below was cold and damp, illuminated by strips of sickly green light. The walls were smooth, almost organic in texture. This was no human construction. As I ventured deeper, I began to hear sounds, muffled whimpers, mechanical whirs, and underneath it all, a low, pulsing hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I rounded a corner and froze. Before me stretched a vast chamber filled with rows upon rows of pods. Transparent cylinders, each containing a human form suspended in glowing liquid. My legs nearly gave out as I approached the nearest one. Inside was a woman, her eyes closed as if in sleep. But the network of tubes and wires connected to her body told a different story. They were doing something to her. To all of them. I recognized some of the faces. Missing persons from nearby towns. People whose disappearances had been written off as runaways or tragic accidents. A scream built in my throat, but before it could escape, a hand clamped over my mouth. I thrashed, but the grip was inhumanly strong. Shh! A voice hissed in my ear. They'll hear you. I was spun around to face my captor. He looked human, but there was something off about his eyes. Too wide, too knowing. Who are you? I managed to choke out. What is this place? He smiled, but it didn't reach those unsettling eyes. This is the future, friend. Your people's future. We're improving you, preparing you. For what? I whispered, though part of me already knew the answer. For what's coming, he replied. The changes your world can't survive, but you will, thanks to us. A noise from deeper in the facility made him turn. They're coming, he said urgently. You need to go. Forget what you've seen here, for your own safety. But I couldn't move, couldn't process the horror before me. I can't just leave them, I stammered. His expression softened, almost pitying. Oh, my friend, he said, you're one of us already. You just don't remember yet. Before I could react, he pressed something cold against my neck. There was a hiss, a sharp pain, and then I woke up in my cornfield, drenched in sweat. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. For a moment, I almost believed it had all been a nightmare. But then I felt it, a small hard lump at the base of my skull. And I knew the harvest was coming, and we were the crop. About the author, Emmett J. Calloway was a Kansas wheat farmer and amateur astronomer. He disappeared in 1984 after submitting a series of increasingly paranoid letters to local newspapers about lights in the sky and underground laboratories. The Hollow Paradise by Marcus J. Harlan. I never thought I'd die in a place so beautiful. The hills of Salzburg were bathed in moonlight, the kind that made the world look like an old photograph, soft, grainy, and timeless. I'd been stationed in Austria for 6 months, guarding supply routes and trying to forget the things I'd seen in Korea. The nights were my solace, quiet and cold, with only the distant hum of the wind to keep me company. That night, I was walking back to the barracks after a late patrol. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, and my boots crunched softly on the gravel road. Then I noticed it, the silence. Not the usual stillness of a sleepy countryside, but an oppressive void. No wind, no rustling trees. Even my footsteps seemed muted, swallowed by something unseen. I stopped, scanning the horizon. That's when I saw it, a faint glow beyond the tree line, pulsing like a heartbeat. My first thought was a downed aircraft. My second was that I should turn back. But curiosity has always been my curse. I pushed through the trees, the branches clawing at my jacket. The glow grew brighter, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. When I broke through the underbrush, I froze. It wasn't an aircraft. The object hovered 6 feet above the ground, a perfect sphere of shifting light and color. It was mesmerizing, like staring into a kaleidoscope made of liquid metal. My skin prickled as a low hum vibrated through my chest, not loud but deep, resonating in my bones. I should have run. God help me, I should have run. The light flared suddenly, blinding me. I felt weightless for a moment, like falling in a dream where there's no bottom to hit. When my vision cleared, I wasn't in Salzburg anymore. I was standing in a field of impossibly green grass under a sky that shimmered with hues no human eye should see, colors that didn't belong on any spectrum I knew of. A warm breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and something sweetly metallic like blood on copper coins. In the distance, rolling hills stretched into infinity, dotted with trees whose leaves glowed faintly blue. It was beautiful, but wrong. "Welcome," a voice said behind me, a voice that wasn't a voice at all, but a sensation pressed directly into my mind. I turned and saw it, 7 feet tall with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that bulged from its head like those of a fly, multifaceted and glinting with unnatural light. Its body was thin and insect-like, limbs too long and jointed in ways that made my stomach churn to watch it move. "Where am I?" My voice cracked as fear clawed up my throat. "Home," it said, or rather projected. The word echoed in my skull like ripples on water. It extended one spindly arm toward me, its fingers ending in delicate claws that looked sharp enough to split atoms. "No," I whispered, stepping back. The creature tilted its head, not in confusion but amusement, and gestured toward the horizon. "See," it said, and suddenly, I did. The field shifted around me like liquid glass melting into new shapes. My childhood home in Kansas, the barracks where I'd spent sleepless nights, even the trench where I'd held dying friends during the war, all rendered with perfect detail, but tinged with an otherworldly sheen. "Stop," I shouted as memories flooded back unbidden, things I'd buried deep now dragged screaming into the light. The creature watched impassively as scenes from my life played out around us like some grotesque theater. My mother's funeral, my first kiss, the moment I killed a man for the first time and realized how easy it was to pull the trigger. "What do you want?" My voice cracked under the weight of it all. "To understand," it replied simply. "Understand what?" "You." The word hung heavy between us as realization dawned. This wasn't paradise. It was a cage designed to strip me bare until nothing remained but raw memory and emotion for them to dissect. "No," I growled through gritted teeth, clenching my fists as anger replaced fear. I lunged at the creature with everything I had left, but hit nothing but air as it dissolved into shimmering particles before reforming behind me effortlessly. "You cannot fight," it said almost pityingly, before raising one claw-like hand toward my head again. And then everything went black. When consciousness returned, if you could call it that, I found myself back on Earth, or rather what looked like Earth. Salzburg's hills bathed once more under moonlight, but something was wrong, terribly wrong, and not just because there were no stars overhead anymore. The grass beneath my feet felt too soft, as if synthetic. Every sound echoed strangely, as if bouncing off invisible walls enclosing this paradise they'd constructed around me. And worst of all, my memories felt hollow, as if pieces had been scooped out, leaving jagged edges behind where once there'd been clarity. They hadn't just taken fragments, they'd rewritten parts entirely, so now even I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Was this even Salzburg? Was I even still human? Or had they already hollowed me out completely, while leaving just enough semblance intact so their experiment could continue uninterrupted? If anyone finds this journal someday after whatever happens next, they'll know two things. One, that paradise isn't always what it seems. And two, that sometimes losing yourself entirely might be kinder than living forever, questioning whether anything, including your own thoughts, is truly yours anymore. The Harvest Protocol by Frederick Henry. They told me Levette died of heat stroke. They lied. I still taste the alkaline bite of white sands air when I wake screaming some nights, the desert's parched breath trapped in my lungs. July 10th, 1956, the date seared into my skull like the symbols we found carved into Levette's bones. We'd been tracking Soviet missile signatures when the radar lit up with something that made the technicians blanch. Not a plane. Not a rocket. A silver disc hovering 6 feet off the playa, silent as a held breath. Levette laughed first, that big Nebraska guffaw of his. "Russians got themselves a fancy new frisbee," he said. The scream cut his laugh in half. Thin silver tendrils shot from the disc's underside, wire-thin and glistening like mercury. They wrapped Levette's limbs before we could blink, yanking him upward so fast his boots left skid marks in the salt crust. I emptied my .45 into that damned thing. The bullets flattened against its surface like they'd hit a bank vault. 3 days later, they found Levette's body 10 miles south. Heat stroke, the report said. Dehydration, hallucination. But I saw the truth when they zipped open the body bag. His olive-drab uniform pristine, not a drop of sweat staining the armpits. His skin looked waxen, translucent as tracing paper. No blood, no eyes. Just 2 perfect holes where they'd scooped them out. The worst part was the cut. A single incision running from sternum to pelvis, edges cauterized so cleanly it looked drawn with a laser, which it probably was. They reassigned me to a desk, burned my field notes, but the nightmares kept coming. Levette's voice whispering their testing, his desiccated fingers brushing my cheek as I slept. Last night, I finally understood. I waited until 300 to sneak into the morgue. The guard didn't see the chloroform rag coming. Levette's body lay in cold storage 4, the steel drawer colder than the desert nights we'd endured together. My penlight shook as I examined his torso. The symbols started at the incision. Tiny, precise markings etched into his ribs, not carved. Grown like metallic lichen. They matched the radar blip patterns from that night. My gut twisted when I realized they weren't random. Coordinates, dates, a timetable. Footsteps echoed in the hall. I snapped photos with the Minox camera I'd smuggled from Berlin, the shutter clicks loud as gunshots. The symbols glinted under the light, rearranging themselves as I watched. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the camera. They're alive. The freezer door slammed open. 2 MPs lunged at me, but I was already moving, years of night patrols in Korea paying off. I kneecapped the first with Levette's femur. God forgive me. The brittle bone shattering on impact. The second got a formaldehyde jar to the temple. I ran. Not toward the gates. They'd have roadblocks up, but into the maze of underground labs even clearance holders weren't supposed to know about. The air grew colder with each descending stairwell, my breath pluming in the greenish light of emergency bulbs. That's when I heard the hum. It vibrated in my fillings first, then my bones. By the time I reached sublevel 7, my vision blurred at the edges. The steel door bore no markings, just a keypad glowing faintly blue. I punched in Levette's birthday, his wife's suggestion after too many forgotten anniversaries. The smell hit me first, coppery and sweet, like a slaughterhouse dipped in honey. Rows of glass tanks lined the room, each filled with viscous amber fluid. Human bodies floated inside, connected to pulsing silver nodes. Not just soldiers, civilians, children, all pale as grubs, their veins mapping blue highways beneath translucent skin. A shadow moved in the central tank. It uncurled slowly, limbs too long and jointed backward. The face, Christ, the face. Smooth as a mannequin's, save for 2 vertical slits where a nose should be. Its eyes opened, solid black orbs that drank the light. The creature pressed a clawed hand against the glass, and the symbols on its fingertips matched those carved into Levette's bones. Alarms wailed. Red light flooded the room as the tank's fluid began draining. I stumbled backward, colliding with a gurney laden with tools. Not surgical steel. Organic-looking instruments that seemed grown rather than forged. One writhed in my hand like a live eel before I dropped it. The creature stepped out dripping, its movements jerky at first, learning, adapting. The MPs burst in as it seized the first man's head, silver filaments erupting from its palms to burrow into his ears. He screamed until his eyes turned milk white, body convulsing as the filaments pumped him full of something dark and shimmering. I ran. Past the dying MP gurgling on the floor, past Levette's empty drawer, out into the desert where the stars burned too bright. They're still out there hunting me. Men in unmarked jeeps, their eyes gleaming with that same unnatural silver when headlights catch them just right. But I know the truth now. Saw it in those tanks, in the dates mapped on Levette's ribs. This wasn't some random abduction. It's a harvest. They're prepping us, tagging us like cattle, getting their methods just right before they roll it out nationwide, maybe worldwide. The film developed this morning. There, between shots of Levette's mutilated torso, something new. Symbols crawling across the negatives like metallic ants. They're in my blood now. Can feel them moving under my skin when the moon's high. I'm mailing this to every paper in the country. If you're reading it, check your loved ones. Check yourself. That mole you've had since birth. The scar from childhood. Look closer, and if you see silver in the sky tonight, run.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.